Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. So the opportunity, what I want to do here is I want to trace an arc over the last 20 years. I want to kind of, for those of you who haven't maybe seen these models before, I'm just going to do a quick grounding in them. Then I want to kind of talk about where they've gone. I want to tie that into a whole new set of markets that I think we're going to serve, that we can apply these models to going forward. And when I mean serve, I mean right now, and I mean this community right now. I think there's a market expansion in this decade that's going to be extremely interesting and important to everybody in this room. And then a little bit, I want to close with some things we've learned about how to play the game in this new world, and particularly how innovation has to get focused in a way that's more disciplined maybe than we've done in the past. So that's kind of where this is headed. So the old models to follow. Okay, so let me just kick this thing off by saying this model here is 60 years old. Everett Rogers came up with this model in the 1950s. And basically what he said was, if you introduce disruptive technology into any community, anywhere, that community will self-segregate into 5 different responses. The first response, and his names for these go across the bottom here, and I'm going to give you the sort of the Silicon Valley version of those names. So the first people to engage a new technology are the technology enthusiasts, and they do it largely because they're just interested in the properties of the technology. They're geeks, and you know, they're just dancing geek to geek is kind of how these things start, right? And then the first major thing that happens with a technology happens when a visionary sponsor enters the game. This is a person with a lot of money and a dream or a vision, and they take a lot of risks early on. And they go ahead of the herd. They want to be the first people ever to do this stuff. And that whole idea of being the pioneer, they want to be that pioneer. They're gonna put a lot of distance between themselves and everybody else. Everybody else tends to get led by this third strategy, which is, I'll do it when I see you do it, okay? And basically, pragmatists kind of say, look, there's just too many things to evaluate. I can't really be an expert myself, so I'll just kind of check in with everybody around me, and when they go, I'll go, and if they're not going, I'm not going to go. The conservative strategy is, I just don't even like this stuff at all. So if I cannot do it, I will not do it, and if I have to do it, I'll wait until as long as I can, and then I'll do whatever the pragmatist did, hopefully cheaper, because you know it's been in the market longer. And then the final response is, you guys are all instruments of the devil, and you know this just never should have happened. Okay, so this model has been very, very stable. But when we applied it to the market development, the thing that we learned about this model was that only one of the 5 responses really was transformative. And that was, what did the pragmatists do? Because it's like block voting in an election. Did the block vote Democrat or Republican? Or did the block, Liberal, Tory? I can't remember, however you guys play it up here, right? How are the Brits played? Anyway, the pragmatists are the key to the dynamics of the market. And so instead of being this nice curve, what we ended up finding was a curve that had broken into 2 pieces. And the first piece, the piece out to the left, we called the early market. And it was made up of technology enthusiasts and visionaries who both, for their own reasons, preferred to go early or first and engage. And they kind of gravitated toward the innovation. And then there was this thing we called the chasm. And the chasm separated that group from the rest. Because the pragmatists looked at that going on and they said, well, that's interesting. And then they turned to each other and they'd say, are you doing this yet? No? No, no, no. Me neither. Good, okay, good. So what would happen is the market would stop. There'd be this lull in the market. And when it was first, when the book first came out, we weren't seeing that lull. We were expecting to go right up Rogers' curve. And so it was very important to see it. And that lull is a pragmatist group of people saying, I won't go unless you go. So this is what we ended up calling the junior high dance problem, okay? So boys on one side of the gym, girls on the other side of the gym, how do we get the dance started? And the interesting thing about this model, I'll just skip ahead for a second, is, you know, at some few minutes later, everybody's on the dance floor. So you go from a state of 0 adoption to a state of 100% adoption, and it's the same pragmatist decision response, which is, I'm going to do whatever you do. So I'm not, and then all of a sudden you do. Oh my God, I'm being left behind. I'm going to go do it too. Okay? So tornadoes and chasms were the exact same response. It was just, is the switch on or is the switch off? Now, bowling alley was this thing in the middle, which was, could you as a company, accelerate the transition from chasm to tornado by focusing on somebody who would be a group of people who were more likely to convert sooner rather than later. And we called these people pragmatists in pain. Okay? So they would normally not convert, but they've got a problem that was bothering them enough that if you could come up with a solution, they would do it. And so a whole lot of crossing the chasm was all about, first of all, can you get the visionaries? Then you use the visionaries to get the product to a point where it's done, or done enough that you can sell it to pragmatists. And then the question was, who could you find for that first beachhead segment to get the pragmatist community adopting? It was almost like there's two waves of adoption, an early market and then a mainstream market. And getting that second wave of adoption, that was the big lesson of the early 90s. And then things go on to Main Street and finally total assimilation. And so that was kind of the model we were using for the 90s, and we were using it with startups a lot, and we just kept on seeing technology after technology come through the marketplace. What happened next, and the models you learn from this are, if you're in the early market, it's a project game. Every customer is a unique event. You're not really selling a product. The product isn't even done yet, really. So you're selling yourself to your customer, and you're kind of selling the entire company to do whatever it is you say your product does, because it doesn't do it yet. So you're going to do the project that will make it do it once, in one instance for that customer. And that becomes your flagship account or your reference account, and it shows the rest of the world this is possible. But it doesn't create pragmatist adoption. To do that, you've got to move to another model. And that's the solution model. The solution model is built around a herd of pragmatists who share a common problem and who want to see a common solution to that problem that other pragmatists have proven that works. So once that solution comes into view, if the problem is universal in that community, the solution becomes universal incredibly rapidly. The example we used early on was a company called Documentum. The folks at Open Text here know them well. So that was a $2 million a year, $2 million a year, $2 million a year, 3 years in a row. Then went 8, 25, 45, and went public on one pragmatist community in pain, the pharmaceutical companies who were trying to handle the documents around new drug approval. But that was a solution model, because they had built one for Boeing, and they'd built one for Syntex, and they'd built one for a state government. Those were 3 projects. They had to focus in, pick one. They picked Syntex. They generalized that into a solution for the rest of pharma. When you get into the tornado, you got to leave the solution model behind, or at least the model that is most rewarded in a tornado is just a product model. It's just ship. As in, we're talking about HP earlier this morning. HP, when the inkjet printers first came out, they had to ship 1 million a month out of Vancouver. Just ship it, right? And if they had a defect, that was a very bad moment, because you're just trying to get product out in the market. So the product model is extremely successful for capturing that rush of customers that come into any category, whether it's an iPhone, an iPod, an iPad kind of product, that kind of stuff. That first rush is huge. The RIM, the BlackBerry, et cetera. When you get into a more mature market, you realize, hey, it's not the iPod, it's the iTunes. That's the real value here. It's not maybe the iPad, it's going to be the App Store, right? And so let me go back here. The consumables model becomes a really important thing. So part of what we learned in the last half of the 90s is it wasn't just about tornadoes. There was this whole model that we had to start sorting through. And what we discovered is those 4 business models, they're very, very different. The leaders that are good at them are different. The operating ratios that you have are different. The sales motions are different. The partner relationships are different. And so if you're going through this model the first time, you have this very, very peculiar sort of experience of company adolescence, where you're trying to figure out what model am I supposed to be on, and how can we play this game. And so for those of you who are in startups and maybe go through this curve, this is an extremely valuable sort of roadmap to have to kind of where are we now? Are we on the right model today? And are we headed toward another model? And what would we have to do to get ready for that kind of thing? And that was a lot of the turmoil that came out of the late 90s was about just trying to figure out how do you do this, and particularly in a large company where one division might be at one part of the life cycle and another division at another part. And then and this basically drove our life for the 90s. Then we had the dot-com, the Y2K, and the dot-com bubble, and then the dot-com bust. And that sort of said, you know what? It kind of, when we came back from the dot-com bust, tech looked a lot more like an industrial than it had ever before, which means, yes, there's still technology adoption life cycles, and yes, those lead to growth markets. And those growth markets, you can be through a technology adoption life cycle, and you can still grow like a weed going forward. So in fact, if you want to be a successful executive in a large corporation, you want to join it just as it's going into the B section, and then leave just as it goes into the C section, right? And then you can say, well, you know, when I was at Oracle, we took it from 50 million to 500 million in about 4 years, and yeah, that was on my watch, and yeah. Of course, if you had just stood there doing nothing, it would have gone from 50 to 500, but then they don't put that on the resume, just, you know, I was there, right? So B markets are fabulous for corporate careers, okay? C markets is where corporate executives earn their living. C markets are cyclical markets, whereas B markets are what they call secular. A secular market is a market that is making a one-time shift from A to B. Like media is right now going through a one-time shift from analog paper to digital. Okay? Once it's done, it's going to be kind of done. But during the process of doing it, there's an enormous amount of infrastructure that has to be put in place, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the B markets. C markets are, you got to maintain that infrastructure. Do we have a train coming? Oh, yes, we do have a train. Excuse me. Okay. I love it. The C markets, those are cyclical growth markets, so they kind of go up and they go down and they go up. The PC industry probably for the last 15 years has sort of been a C market, right? And so we had to learn in tech about how to manage in a C market, because we didn't know that. And in fact, we then had to start learning about declining markets. We'd seen the kind of the mini computer folks go through this, but you didn't think the workstation guys were going to go through it. And then our friends at Sun sort of kind of had a very strong D experience, leading to becoming an O company, right? They were bought by Oracle the other year ago. And then you can even have a end-of-life experience, sort of like a Kodak moment, where basically your technology is done. We're done. You can join the slide rule in a museum somewhere because we don't do film anymore, right? And so for the first time, tech had to kind of grow up and sort of take responsibility for the entire curve, because the enterprise customers said to us basically in 2002, we've spent, we think, on the order of $1 trillion with you guys. Hope you enjoyed it. We have used maybe 1/10 of what we bought from you. And we're not going to buy much for a while. And by the way, all that maintenance we're paying you, well, we don't want to pay very much of that maintenance to you either. And you guys better learn how to act like an adult industrial sector, or we'll find somebody who can. Okay? So that was a big learning for us. And in that world, we started saying, okay, we need to rethink innovation. And so the book that David referenced called Dealing with Darwin, what it said is, it said, look, we've had lots of innovation we've known about. This disruptive innovation, that's kind of how, I was dining out on that. Clay Christensen with the Innovator's Dilemma, doing a lot of work with disruptive innovation, this solution kind of innovation, a product innovation, platform innovation. Platforms became a very important idea. We saw Windows become a platform. We saw Intel become a platform. Oracle became a platform. Big issue. And they were all kind of growth market ideas, and they were all around product leadership. And then you kind of went into the more cyclical places, and the problem with cyclical markets is that kind of innovation, it's too expensive and too high risk to do in a cyclical market. Cyclical markets don't change enough market share fast enough to reward the kind of risk that those kinds of innovation implies. And so what you see in cyclical industrial markets is either a customer intimacy strategy or an operational excellence strategy. So customer intimacy, and you think of things like we have line extensions, we have enhancement or design innovations, marketing innovations, experiential innovations. Think about markets, and more it's about what is the experience as opposed to did you do something really disruptive? Okay. And on the operational excellence side, value engineering, integration engineering, process engineering, business model reformulation. Just again, these are the ways in which cyclical industries can continually find new ways to create value going forward. They were not familiar to the tech community in Silicon Valley, but certainly in the last 10 years, they've been huge. Mark Hurd's whole career at HP was essentially an exercise in value engineering, right? Just essentially taking out all the fat he could find. Probably a lot of the muscle as well. Okay, so I mean, the new CEO, Leo Apotheker, is trying to figure out, what he's got left in the cupboard, if anything. But the point is, you can do that in a cyclical market. Okay, you kind of sell out the future, but you make the present. And then you also have to take responsibility for the fact that some of your portfolio really is sliding off the other side of things. And so you're either going to have to do organic innovation to replace it, or you're going to have to acquire companies, structural innovation, or maybe just harvest and leave. And this is a very, very kind of busy slide, but that was the point. That was the whole point of dealing with Darwin. There's lots of forms of innovation. It's not just disruptive. In the tech community, the only innovation that we said was real innovation was disruptive innovation, but that's not true. That's not true. Innovation is anything that creates separation between you and a competitor and causes customers to prefer your offer to theirs. Every one of those things can do that. Okay? So that was now up into that. This has all been the enterprise experience of the last 2 decades. But the big thing that happened, of course, was after the Y2K and the enterprise IT kind of went into the tank. Consumer IT took off. And it took off at a speed that people, that nice Geoffrey Moore and his chasm idea, too bad it's irrelevant now, right? Which felt a little threatening, frankly. So it's like, well, what did happen? What was going, because what chasm? Facebook has 600 million subscribers, right? It's the second or third largest country in the world behind China and India, right? It's huge. So chasm, schmasm, dude. I mean, what are you talking about? So what we realized was that what happened with the consumer tech things, and particularly Google and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and the things that we are probably most familiar with, is adoption became disconnected from monetization. And so the adoption, there was no technology disruption for the adoption. It was just there, and it was delightful. And when you offer something that is delightful and free over broadband that's not expensive, don't be shocked when it gets consumed until the last drop of broadband has been exhausted, right? But what we did realize is that monetization still was a chasm problem. So these models definitely work better, or let's put it this way, these models always work, in my view, in a B2B scenario. In a B2C scenario, you can still see the patterns emerging. Facebook wasn't an overnight success. It was first a success at Harvard. So that was its first visionary kind of account. And then it spread to the other Ivy Leagues. And you could argue that is something akin to crossing the chasm bowling alley. And then it went forward. But having said that, it wasn't the kind of tough chasm crossings that we'd been dealing with in the 90s. It was a much more viral, much more contagious situation. And so if you're going to be successful in consumer IT, you have to be a master of creating viral effects. And it's not, we call it viral marketing, but the truth is, it's actually just a viral product. And our friends at Apple have shown us 3 times in 1 decade how a spectacularly viral product can set entire industries on their ear. I mean, the last decade, it's unbelievable. The music industry, the cellular telephony industry, and now the media industry are literally being completely overturned by the introduction of a single product, a single consumer product, which then creates this massive leverage, which is creating all this reorganization. So there's stuff, if you're going to play in the consumer business, you have to be cool. You have to figure out this viral cool thing. Don't look at me, okay? Cool is not my strong suit, okay? So, but I can at least recognize it when I see it, sort of like the Supreme Court with pornography. I can't define it, but I can recognize it when I see it. Okay, I can recognize cool, but I'm not cool, and I couldn't tell you how to be cool. I just know you have to be cool to make this stuff work. So that's sort of a kind of a, if you will, a sort of a retrospective of the models. And if you're not familiar with them, you probably do need to internalize these models, and there's bunches of books to help you do that. Because it's a little bit like raising kids. You know, when you raise little kids, you had the terrible 2s and the trying 3s and the fearsome 4s and the fabulous 5s or whatever it was. Those books were incredibly valuable as a first-time parent, because you'd go, oh my God, my kid, they're okay. It's all right that they're wetting the bed, or it's all right that they're, teething on their brother, or whatever. And similarly, these models I think are pretty good to help not just you get oriented, but to help you get your team on the same page, because they help the whole team realize what forces are acting on us going forward. Okay, so that's sort of a kind of a retrospective view of sort of models thinking, largely Silicon Valley centric, kind of growing up a bit over the last couple of decades. That's all fine, old people can talk about it, and that would be me now. But the question really is, what's coming and where are we going, and what is the opportunity for the startups in the back of this hall and the startups that are kind of implicit in every table in this room? So I think the big thing of this last decade, as I just said, because of the Y2K bubble dynamic, enterprise IT for all of this decade, this last decade, was essentially an exercise in optimizing and economizing, largely through virtualization, potentially going to cloud, but not going to cloud to grow, going to cloud to economize, right? Trying to find ways to store things more cheaply or compute more cheaply. Meanwhile, while enterprise IT was on hold, of course, consumer IT was on fire. And this transformation, I mean, you could do it in huge presentations about it. I just want to make the point that there were 4 technologies that converged in this past decade, any one of which probably would have been transformative. But when you take the 4 of them together, it created a world in which our entire culture, our entire culture has become digitized. There used to be a time where you could talk about my digital life. It's very hard to do that now, because we are leading digitally mediated lives. The older folks in the room with me, not too digitally mediated, but you just go down a gradient of age, and you get down to a 14-year-old, and the cell phone is the center of their emotional and physical and psychological development, right? And that's why they have those little funny little thumbs, that can do all that stuff. So we know that there's been a transformation, and of course, you look at what's going on in the Middle East right now. That's a direct consequence of these technologies in this digitally mediated world. We meet people digitally, we fall in love digitally, we make war digitally, we do finance digitally, we do commerce digitally. Everything is becoming digital. So as consumers, we have this unbelievable digital experience, and it's revolutionary in a way that I just don't think. It's just hard to figure out even how to state the scope of that. But anyway, that genie is well and truly out of the bottle, and we're on our way, and we don't know where we're going, but it's a heck of a ride, okay? So what it's led to, however, is this thing we call the Millennials Lament, which is, how can I be so powerful as a consumer and so lame as an employee? I mean, Sunday night, the world is at my command, and Monday morning, I can't figure out, what my best customer really wants from me. So what's going on, and why can't we have this stuff together? And this is the forcing function, or the impedance mismatch that's going to create an enormous amount of wealth creation in this coming decade, which is, we need to bring the consumer capabilities into the enterprise. And so if you look at that and you say, well, but the enterprise, by the way, if you talk to CIOs about this, they know it's coming, but oh man, they'd like it to come on the next guy's watch. Because it's just there's so much that you have to do in order to make this thing actually work. So the first question we ought to ask ourselves is, well, Geoffrey, futurist, blah, 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 they always think things are coming really soon. What would make it come really this decade? Why can't we wait really another decade and have crappy systems at work? We've had them for years already. It's a tradition. Why couldn't we just stay with that? And I think the answer is we started changing the world, the B2B world in particular, about 20 years ago with this outsourcing of manufacturing to China, followed very quickly by outsourcing of a lot of services to India. And the effect of that outsourcing was just remarkable. I mean, it was the most effective foreign aid program in the history of the planet. I mean, just by far, by wildly. I mean, for somebody growing up in my generation to have to witness China being the number 2 economy in the world, you say, how is that possible, right? And it's because of this. And there's lots and lots of good things that have happened from that. It's been hard on the developed economy. Well, why has it been so hard on us? Well, because the goods that come back from that globalized world into our economy are priced at a very, very different point. Now, that's great for consumers. But for those of us who make a living in a developed economy and have to support the infrastructure and the wage scale and the cost of living of a developed economy, commoditization is a very, very scary enemy because it does not go away. And you can try to protect yourself from it for a while, and some countries have been very protectionist, but sooner or later you have to pay the piper, and most people believe, I don't believe in just ripping off the skin and immediately exposing yourself to the worst of everything, but we have to have a systematic way for coping with this. And you say, well, how do you do that? You say, well, we have to create offers that are sufficiently differentiated from the commodity offer that people will pay me the difference. So I can keep the thing you have to keep constant is your margin model. This is true of a company, this is true of a country. You have to maintain your profit margins at whatever, that's the constant in your business. You can change categories, you can change people, you can change customers, you can change offers, you can't change your margin model. So that means we have to differentiate to a level to sustain our margin model. Well, how do you do that? And the answer is actually pretty clear. You have to specialize. We no longer can be the general purpose, everybody does everything kind of company that my father grew up in, and that frankly I entered when I was first coming into the workforce, where companies essentially did, everything. So you built the chip and you built the storage device and you built the software and you built the hardware and you did the services and the whole thing. And in tech, obviously, we've completely deconstructed that so that we can specialize. Cisco builds networking equipment. Now it's moving up now, but for a long time that was all it did, right? EMC for a long time, all it did was storage. Microsoft, just software, operating systems, then applications, that kind of stuff. So you specialize. Well, when you specialize, what you have to say is, well, where do I get the resources to specialize? Well, I've got to economize. And the economizing increasingly says, I'm going to do it for cheaper, and then eventually you go, the problem is if I try to do it too cheaply, I'll do it badly. I'm probably better off if I give this to another company and we outsource it. So that leads to more outsourcing. And now you start seeing that this thing is a cycle, right? And it's just not going to stop. You keep going round and around this circle, and the globalization is stronger, the commoditization is stronger, so we have to differentiate even more. This is a kind of a Darwinian rat race. And this world is getting flatter and flatter, okay? Now that's just not for us. That's for everybody in every developed economy. So now, why would IT make a difference in this world? Okay? Because IT is one of the few assets we have in the developed world where we're much better at IT than the developing world, much better. So if we can figure out a way to leverage this, it's a great idea. So if you start looking at this world from the point of view of the developed economies, here's what's going on. The structure of business has changed. We've gone from the old middle managers were the people that stood between top management and the bottom of the pyramid, to middle managers are the people that live, and they're the connective tissue along a value chain that goes across 3, 4, 5, 6 different companies in order to deliver the final result to the final end customer. So all of a sudden there's a need to negotiate a whole lot of things across company boundaries, across country boundaries, language barriers, culture barriers that we never had before. And the middle manager, instead of being a cog in a great corporate machine, has become sort of the middle linebacker or the midfielder in soccer. They have to run all over the field, and they have to perform at high speed. So you look at that thing and you say, well, what are they doing with this stuff? And the business networks are saying, look, we need to communicate, we need to coordinate, we need to collaborate. We didn't have to do that as much anymore. And so how do we get that stuff done? How do we build these relationships? And they have got to be built virtually, digitally across the world. And so how do we engage with peers to solve problems? And the problem is, it's not in the ERP system. The answers are not there. There are some facts in the ERP system we need, like where is the shipment, or what was the order amount, or how much did we release on allocation, or what was the lot number of the contaminated lot. There's information in there, but you can't turn to the system to get the answer. Much of the answer is in people's heads, and it has to be negotiated out. So this is where I think the opportunity is going to hit. It's going to hit the middle management. And the interesting thing about middle management is we've never invested in IT for the middle of our organizations. We invested in huge amounts of ERP, but that was primarily to automate the front line. And then we invested in huge amounts of business intelligence, we used to call it decision support, executive information systems, and that was to make our executive suite smarter. But if you were somebody in the middle, there are only really two things we ever did for anybody in the middle. We got them a laptop, and then we got them a BlackBerry. That was it. That was it. I mean, after that, it's like, no middle manager in the world says, hey, I've got a tough problem, I want to log on to SAP. It's just not what happens, okay? So the issue then becomes, so what do we want to do? Well, what we want to do is we want to take these design principles and these power principles that we've seen unfold in the consumer world, and we want to bring them into the enterprise world. Okay? And when you look at that, you say, well, what would that really be? The answer is you don't have to look very far, because many of the facilities we want already exist in the consumer world, but they don't have the word enterprise in front of them. And putting the word enterprise ready in front of these things is something that none of these companies will do themselves. There is no chance that Facebook will make an enterprise-ready Facebook, or Google an enterprise-ready Google, or YouTube, or Twitter. It won't happen. Because the way the business models work, the way the margin models work, the way the partnership models work, they're just antithetical. It's not going to happen. So they'll all have divisions that'll sort of try to nod nicely toward the enterprise, but that's about as far as it's going to go, which means there's a huge vacuum to be filled. Because this stuff, if you buy in this argument about the way in which the world is going, if we have to arm our middle managers if we're going to be able to maintain our margin models. This stuff would do it. Let me show you the kind of things that we have in mind. You can say, look, Facebook, well, I need to know somebody, I'm filling a project in China, right? Or on-demand conferencing, let's get everybody together right now. Global presence detection, I need to talk to Harry. Where is Harry? Harry may not even know where Harry is, but his cell phone knows where Harry is, right? So we can find Harry. Can you take YouTube? I want to do a demo, I don't want to get in another plane, search, it goes on and on and on, okay? So it's not that there aren't use cases for all of these things in the enterprise, because there are plenty of use cases for. The problem is that it's just really, really hard to make consumer technology enterprise ready. Look at the kinds of stuff that you got to worry about. So the first thing is, the great thing, the asset you have is don't redesign the capability. Mark Benioff, when he designed the first Salesforce.com, he had asked himself the question, why isn't enterprise software as easy to use as Amazon.com? So when he wrote the first Salesforce.com app and he did the interface, he copied Amazon. Exactly. When 2 years ago he wanted to say, why can't we have Twitter, enterprise Twitter? He said, enterprise chatter, like Facebook. He copied the Facebook interface exactly. Why did he do that? If you copy Facebook exactly, you don't need a manual, right? You don't need training. You don't need support. People do it. See, as soon as you make a change to make it, quote, better, you screw everything up, okay? So, this is engineers like famous for doing this, right? I can do it smarter. Yes, you can. Shoot that man, right? because they'll completely disrupt the entire point of the process, which is we want to leverage a complete cultural phenomenon that already exists. But here's the heavy lifting, right? So it's got to be secure. We have to worry about data leakage. We have to worry about liability. We have to worry about discoverability, because especially, not maybe so much on your side of the border, but we have more lawyers than we have football players. We have more lawyers than anything on our side of the border, and discoverability is a big issue for IT. And the interfaces to the systems of record, because none of this stuff works if you can't talk to SAP. It's not that SAP is irrelevant, it's just that SAP has to be on demand, not on a pull basis, not on a push basis, right? And it's got to be very ad hoc in the moment, very mobile, global, social, virtual, all that kind of stuff. Reliability, scalability, maintainability, all the stuff that people worry about. And so I think the great thing about being here is RIM, this is a playbook that RIM taught the world about. When you talk to Jim Balsley and those guys, when I was talking with him at the World Economic Forum those years that we were going there together, you'd see the thought processes that RIM put into, well, how does the service provider's business model got to work, and what has to happen there? Okay, now what does the CIO got to do, and how does the BlackBerry, BES server have to work with that? And then what does the end user want, and where can we go from there? And you guys are going to have a raffle for a torch. I have a torch, by the way. This is a hell of a product, okay? And it's a business product, and it's been a very successful business product. So it's not that this is not a magic art, and it's certainly not a magic art for this community. But it's a lot of work. Now, the good news is that creates barriers to entry, and it also creates margin model, right? Because this is extremely valuable work. So I really want to encourage you to figure out a way to tap into this capability if it's in the environment of your business model. So I just want to close with one last set of thoughts, and it's just 4 or 5 slides. It's around this notion of how do you innovate to compete in this new world? And Silicon Valley gets a lot of credit for innovation, and the thing that we began to sort out is we began to feel that there's kind of a dark side to innovation, which is probably most innovation is waste. And that was we challenged ourselves to figure out where do you get the return on innovation and how does that work? And we learned a key lesson, which I want to close with, okay? So the lesson starts by saying, look, if you look at innovation, there's 3 ways you can make money if you spend $1 on innovation. You can differentiate, which will mean you'll get a better margin, you'll get more sales because customers prefer your offer to the other guys. You can neutralize, which means you can catch up to an innovation that a competitor made, and so therefore kind of get back into the game. And you can optimize. And optimizing requires innovation. And if you can take money, you can take cost out of your system, and that also improves your margin model. So if you look at those 3 things, your claim to fame, and then table stakes and making money, let me kind of walk you through the key things we've learned on each one of those, and then the final lesson about keeping them separate. So this is the differentiation idea. Now, every company has a set of competitors. The customers put you in that set. The analysts put you in that set. And the idea is companies are all different. Their offers are all differentiated from each other. But they're inside a yellow circle because at the margin, the customer is not willing to pay an extraordinary premium for any one of those offers. So they have a preference, but it's within an envelope where best price is going to have quite a lot of influence. If you can differentiate in a way that takes you outside the yellow circle, you're able to, we call this creating an unmatchable offer, okay? You create enormous power, enormous bargaining power. That's why everybody's talking about Apple for the last decade. And by the way, it's why people are learning to hate Apple now. Because with enormous power typically comes abuse of enormous power, right? And you're just watching Apple starting down the trail of abuse. You watched it with their media negotiations. You're seeing it in the app stores. And it's going to generate a reaction, the same way that Microsoft created a reaction, the same way that Google created a reaction, the same way that Facebook creates a reaction. But the point about it is, it's because they have enormous power. And why do they have enormous power? Because they have an unmatchable offer, okay? And that unmatchable offer is something you should aspire to. Now, we shouldn't aspire to be global revolutionaries at every table, because there's only one globe and there's like 25 tables here. But what we can do is say, but in our target market, we can do this. In our target market, and you focus the market to where the market has to be big enough to matter to your company and small enough for you to dominate. So you have to sort of figure out where you are. But you can do this, okay? If you don't do it, by the way, it's not you're out of business. It's just that you don't have this kind of bargaining power, so your margin model is continually being threatened by commoditization, and you're going to experience a deterioration in your margin model, which is not pleasant. So kind of cools to doing this stuff, goals to be, keys to differentiating, goals to be unmatchable. That means you have to make a very asymmetrical bet. You end up taking one of your offers or one dimension of your offers and wildly over-resourcing it, and then kind of figuring out how to make do everywhere else, okay? And it's a big bet. So, I mean, you know, we talk about the iPad. Anybody remember the Newton, right? The Macintosh, the Lisa, right? So these, I mean, there are some spectacular sort of pancake falls around this play. The Razor was great, but it was followed by the Crazer, right? Many of you probably don't remember the Crazer, okay? But Motorola does. They remember both products, okay? Innovating for neutralization is the opposite problem. Somebody got outside the yellow circle. The yellow circle's catching up to it. You got to get back inside the yellow circle. What you're trying to do now is all you're trying to do is get something that's good enough so that you can take the other guy's supposedly unmatchable capability and say, no, we have one of those too, okay? Now, nobody thinks yours is better than theirs, but it's good enough, okay? This is what Nokia has failed to do, okay? This is what Google did with Android. And this is why Stephen Elop, who just came from Microsoft and went to Nokia, shot the Symbian operating system and said, we're going with Microsoft, which is clearly an inferior choice to either Android or iOS. But the problem was, you say, why couldn't Nokia in 4.5 years, 2007, let's give them benefit of that, 4 years, from 2007, 2011, why couldn't they come up with something that neutralized the Apple iPhone? Answer? They were too proud. The engineers at Nokia would not do neutralization. They wanted to out-differentiate. And so they spent 3.5 years trying to out-differentiate. This is a huge, huge cause of grief in high tech. This is why Carol Bartz had to sell the search business at Yahoo to Microsoft. Because the search business at Yahoo could not let go of trying to out-differentiate Google, because Google had taken their search business from them. Okay? There are times where you just have to cut your losses and get back into the game. The best company who's ever been at neutralization, by far, Microsoft, right? Microsoft, if you think about it, invented very little, but neutralized and then caught up and then went ahead. So it neutralized Lotus 1-2-3. It neutralized Ashton Tate. It neutralized WordStar and then WordPerfect. Okay? It neutralized Novell. It neutralized Netscape. It's trying to neutralize Google. May not get there this time. They're not as nimble. But that was an unbelievable performance around neutralization. So neutralization is probably a scarcer skill in tech than differentiation. And being a fast neutralizer is a critical part. You need to have this capability in your company if you're going forward. So it's about being good enough, fast. Microsoft got that first Internet Explorer into the market within a year of Netscape Navigator. It sucked, right? It wasn't really good enough, but it was a placeholder for good enough. And Internet Explorer 2 still wasn't probably good enough, but Internet Explorer 3 was better than Navigator, okay? So that's how they played that game. And so emulate Microsoft when it comes to neutralization. And then finally, this issue around optimization, we're talking about all this price deflation and what's going on. And again, if you don't optimize, you can't get the profits necessary to fund the innovation going forward. So we tend to think about innovators and optimizers because psychologically they're very different. But it's all part of one ecosystem. You got to optimize on one end of the life cycle in order to invest in innovation and neutralization earlier in the life cycle. So this optimization stuff, it's really important, okay? And again, the goal is to self-fund. Now the thing that's interesting about this self-funding thing is, well, let me I'll make that the last point. I want to make one point before I go there. So those are the three forms of getting a return on innovation. And the thing we've learned about them is, they're very, very different. The values that we're trying to do are different, and the way you the question you challenge yourself with is different. And here's the key learning. Don't mix modes. If you set up a team to do a project or a program or an initiative, you give them one of these three challenges and you take the other two off the table. If you have a problem that you say, well, Geoffrey, I'm sorry, we have this product line, and we definitely have to differentiate, but we also have to neutralize, fine. Break the release in two. Do not have the neutralization effort held captive by the differentiation effort, because you'll delay the release for 3.5 years. Right? You've got to get the neutralization on a fast track and let the differentiation, because differentiation isn't done until it's done, but neutralization needs to be done now, or before Christmas, right? That kind of stuff. So each one of these has its own rhythm, its own leadership, its own cadence. When you design initiatives and you're running your company, make sure you separate them out. Now the final thing I just want to close with is, where do you get the money for this stuff? And the answer is, you've already got the money. Most of the money that people spend on innovation and on making their company better is wasted. Now, and not just at other people's companies, okay? I mean, obviously other people are not as smart as you are, but even at your company, okay? You say, well, how is that possible? Because honest to God, I really don't believe this is true, okay? I really don't believe this. So you say, okay, well, here's where it comes from. If you initiate a project to really be differentiation, this is going to be our claim to fame. This is our better than best kind of thing. And you bring it to market, and it's good, and people give you lots of credit for it. It's even maybe best in class, but it's still inside the yellow circle, you're not going to get the payback. Customers do not pay much more for best in class than for good enough. They'll pay a little bit more, but not a lot more. Okay? You have to be beyond class to get that return. So all the R&D about being better, not good. That's waste. You either are going to be unmatchable or good enough. And between good enough and unmatchable, there is a huge, huge spectrum of possibilities, most of which are, well, all of which are seriously under-rewarded. Good enough gets a huge reward because you're in the game, and beyond class gets a huge reward because you're dictating terms. But everything in between, no. So that's the first place the waste comes. So you're probably spending too much money on differentiation, particularly if you're funding differentiation in many different products in many different states of the life cycle. Most of them probably shouldn't get funded. Okay? You say, no, I'm sorry, you're in a neutralization phase of your life. We're going to differentiate with only a few of our products. The next one is, the next one's neutralization that tries to differentiate at the same time and therefore goes too slowly, is way too expensive, and isn't fast enough. This is the disease that Yahoo and Nokia both suffered from, and they're going to try to get themselves out of. Sorry. And then the third one is optimization that really doesn't go after the tough stuff. Doesn't really try to get the real resources freed up in your company. So good news about waste, you already have the money in your budget, right? If you stop wasting it, there is no downside, trust me. If you spend it someplace else, there is an upside. So frankly, what the hell are you waiting for, right? I mean, that's it's just like, come on, people. This is right here. This is fuel. Go get the fuel, right? So the recap here, just to kind of close, and I want to turn it back over to Ian and the team, is the models that I shared with you at the beginning of the talk still apply. They need to be continually updated and matured as the industry matures, but they still create frameworks. And their purpose is really to create a framework for you and your colleagues to have tough conversations around what's going on around you. The new markets to serve, this last decade was not a particularly good decade to be a B2B technology company, unless you were VMware or in that kind of optimization world. This coming decade, with this consumerization of enterprise IT and all of the implications that means, it's a huge decade. This is absolutely where you want to be for the coming decade going forward. And then this new race is to run. As you're playing this new game, this business about differentiate, neutralize, and optimize, and how important those three tracks are. And they have to be done in parallel. They're not serial. You can't say, well, I'll optimize this year, and I'll neutralize next year, and I'll differentiate the next year. No. You got to do all three in parallel, right? But the key thing is don't try to meld them. They do not mix well with each other. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. I'm going to have a chance to be on a panel a bit later today. See you at lunch also, but thanks a lot. Appreciate it.